Good evening. It's so great to see a full house at the Lee Kuo Wei room. When we were advertising this a few weeks ago, we were a bit nervous to sign up, and thanks to to Matt and Sylvia for helping us to get the word out. And so tonight, it's so great to see all of you here. You're obviously interested in this topic, as am I, and I'm so glad that Asia Society Hong Kong has tonight to introduce you to this book and Matthew's wonderful work. And I know he's been speaking all over the city and other places, but it's really an honor for Asia Society Hong Kong to host tonight's program. This is the last copy of the book, so feel free to grab the last copy. I'm sure we can get more, and our store, we would love to carry more copy of this book and get Matthew to sign it for you. Awakening the Advocates, Memoirs of Modern Slavery Activists. So please, we are really this wonderful book talk tonight. I think those of you who know Matthew knows his distinguished career. I think, almost 4 decades, or at least 4 decades in the work that he has been doing. And it is, I have to say, I'm surprised 4 decades later, it is still as relevant and important and more. I think when he probably started 4 decades ago, it was a very different world. And I think those of you who, like myself, I think it was January earlier this year, seeing the news of a Chinese celebrity being rescued from a syndicate from Myanmar. And when you heard the story, it was like, really? January 2025, a young man was abducted in Thailand. And I kind of had to think about it. Used to be, when you think about modern day slavery, it usually involved women, young women. And it's the world has changed a lot. But unfortunately, slavery, this issue of slavery is still with us. And I know tonight we're going to hear more from Matt about his work. And I'm also really delighted that we have Sylvia Friedman. Sylvia, thank you for being a friend of Asia Society. In fact, Sylvia also needs no introduction. She's an award-winning journalist, filmmaker, and she also wrote a book, and Fearless, A Guide to Freedom and Fulfilling Your Fullest Potential, which was published also this year. And I had the pleasure of writing a little blurb for the book. So Sylvia, thank you for agreeing to help moderate tonight's program, and thank to both of you. And I think you also saw a lot of the program that's coming up. We're going to have a very busy summer. Usually around this time of the year, things kind of quiet down, but not here at Asia Society. We have a lot of program coming up this not only this month, but July and August. So stay tuned. And those of you who are not a member, please consider joining, because we can bring you more programs like this by with your support. And we get no support from the government other than this beautiful facility. The government is our landlord, and we are very grateful for them leasing this place to us on a modest rent, but we do still have to pay rent and other facility, maintenance of this building. This is a historical site, and I noticed somebody have never been to this site before. I know there was one. How many of you is the first time here at Asia Society? I'm kind of happy to see this, because that means I can tell you more about it and encourage you to come back. We have tours as well as exhibition. And we've been here about 13 years. And if it's your first time, we want you to come back. There's a lot of wonderful story about Asia Society we want to share with you. But thank you for coming tonight, and hopefully you guys will come back in the future for programs like this, as well as our exhibition. And so again, thank you. Enjoy the evening, and I'm going to hand it over to Matt to get tonight's program started with a presentation, and then follow by a fireside chat with Sylvia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice. Alice is a class act in leadership, and I really admire her. She's a trailblazer and a real role model for all of us. Also, thank you to everyone who's here. Shout out to TVB in the back who will film, and they're interviewing Matt for a documentary on the pig butchering or online scam trafficking. And Matt will go into that a little bit tonight. Thank you also to Carmel Giblin for offering 10 tickets on your dime. So thank you for offering that. And I see, familiar faces. You know who you are. Without further ado, but right before we go into it, and I know this is unconventional, but I just want to stress that we're in a safe place. We're going to have Q&A for about 20 minutes at the end. But if we can you can stand up or you can sit, but reach out to at least 3 people and shake their hands. And then I'll go into it. Okay, so right now, you have like 40 seconds, okay? So ask their name, get to know people, because this time should be a networking event as well. Okay, let's do it. Do you want to do it selfie? I guess it's too late to do it selfie. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you for bearing with me. But I just want to stress that I hope you can network and meet new people tonight as well. So Matt, without further ado, can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Okay, well, my name is Matt Friedman. I have been... Do I need this?
No, yes.
Yeah, I do.
Because we're recording it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm somebody who grew up in the United States. And 25 years ago, I decided that I needed to make a change. And so I took an assignment in Nepal that I thought would last for 8 months. But 35 years later, I haven't been able to find my way home. So I spent 8 years in Nepal, 5 years in Bangladesh, another 10 years in Thailand, and about 13 years in Hong Kong. And during that time, I spent most of it focusing on issues related to human rights, human trafficking, public health, et cetera. I've had the pleasure of visiting over 70 countries and working with over 42 governments. So basically, a lot of exposure, a lot of experience. I'm happiest when I'm in the field, when I'm with real people in real circumstances. I don't do as much of that these days, but much of what I'm going to be talking about will be my experiences over the years in some of the things that I did that relate to human trafficking and various other things as well.
So how did you get your start in trafficking? And in addition to the 11-year-old girl, can you talk about New York and your grandma?
Okay, so people often ask, where did the seed for human trafficking come from? When I was 5 years old, I was a little rascal. And I would wander up to this mountain near my house called Cedar Mountain by myself. And so I'd get these lava rocks and bring them back and put them under a bush. And my mom found this, and she knew that her son shouldn't be going out and doing that. So she brought me outside and said, "Did you get those rocks?" And I said, "No." "Are you sure you didn't get those?" And I said, "No." So she told me this story about how her mom was coming from Germany to the United States to meet up with her husband, who came early to make sure he was settled in Los Angeles. She got on the boat, made it to Ellis Island, got on a train. When she was in Chicago, she thought she was in Los Angeles. She was going around asking people, but she only spoke German, so nobody understood what she was talking about. "Am I here? Am I here?" This one guy comes up and says, "You're here. I'm supposed to take you to your husband. Come with me." He was a white trafficker. He was going to take her off to a brothel. She was 23 years old. She was young. She was pretty. Had he gone with her, then basically I wouldn't be here sitting right now. And so my mom told me this story because she said that people intervened, got her back on the train. She made it there. They became the godparents for my sister. And it always stuck with me because she was trying to convey to me the fact that there are bad people in this world, and these people take advantage of them. So at age 5, I had this seed in my mind. I was thinking, oh my gosh, what this is. So every time it was in my life, I would say, oh yeah, that's that thing that my mom told me. But the story that kind of brought me over the line to being an activist is the 11-year-old story. Many of you have heard this story, but I'll say it anyways because I think it's one of the flagship reasons for how I got into all of this. And this, as the story goes, when I was in Nepal, I was a public health officer, and my job was to translate resources into healthier people. And so one of the portfolios I had was HIV/AIDS. And we were finding 12, 13-year-old girls who were HIV positive. Couldn't understand what was going on. This is a very conservative culture. So we went to the shelters to ask them, you know, what's the story? How did you get into this situation where you got AIDS? And so they pretty much told the same story over and over again. And it went something like this. Human trafficker, a guy around 20 years old, would go into a remote village, flash a bunch of money around. He wanted everyone to think he was rich. He'd then say, I'm looking for a wife. Don't want an urban wife, I want a village wife. Find a girl, 12 years old, befriend her, go to the family and say, I'd like to marry your daughter. They're thinking he's rich, he's handsome, he's going to take care of our daughter, going to take care of us. Everybody's happy. 2 days later, they have a wedding ceremony. After that, he goes to the family and says, I'm going to take your daughter to Kathmandu, but don't worry, I'll be back in 3 months. But that's not what's going to happen. Instead, he takes her to Mumbai, India, to the red light district. When he gets there, he puts her in a room and he says, honey, stay here, I'll be right back. She was coming in, she saw all these men and women milling around, wearing funny clothes. She said, no, don't leave me. He says, it's okay, I'll be right back. He then goes to the madam to get the $500 for having sold her to the brothel. He has the gold from the wedding, and he hands the wedding pictures to her. He then leaves to go to Nepal to do this again and again, maybe 40, 50 times in a year. The madam then goes into the room where the girl is and says, guess what? Your husband just sold you to me, and you're going to be with 20 guys a day, every day, because I say so. You can imagine this girl shocked. No, my husband loves me. No, that's what happens. When many of these girls hear that this is what their life is going to be, they say, I will kill myself before I do those shameful things. I'm a good Hindu girl. The madam then brings out the photo of the wedding and says, is this your mom, your dad, your brother? If you hurt yourself, we'll hurt them. So she's trapped in the situation. In order to make her into a prostitute, it's quite simple. You bring in a couple of professional rapists, and over a couple of days, they'll rape this poor girl 20, 30 times until she just lays back and accepts whatever happens to her. After that, she's put on the line. She will be with 20 guys a day, every day, till after a couple of years, she gets what's called black eye, where she's so depleted physically, emotionally, nobody wants her, so they throw her out onto the street. So I was hearing this story over and over again, but I didn't understand the evil of it until I actually went to those brothels. I was invited by the Indian government to do public health checks. I had a police officer with me. Went into one of the brothels, and there was an 11-year-old trafficking victim. This girl saw this Caucasian guy, saw an opportunity, ran up to me, wrapped herself around me, and said, save me, they're doing terrible things to me. I looked down at this child who was hysterically crying. I turned to the police officer and said, we need to get her out of here. He said, we can't do that. So what are you talking about? You're a police officer. He says, if we try to leave now, we'll both be killed. To make a long story short, we left. We came back with a lot more police, but of course she was gone. Now, I tell that story because I wasn't one of those 15-year-olds that said, when I grow up, I want to become an activist. In fact, I did everything I could not to become one. But every once in a while in life, we're tested. That was my big test. I should have gotten her out of there. When I think back, there were probably a dozen things I could have done. And so I eventually did what a lot of activists eventually do. Surrendered to the fact that now that I've been exposed to this, this is what I'm going to do with my life, and 35 years later, here I am talking to you. That's pretty much my story.
So you've seen a lot over the last 35 years, and you were fighting trafficking even before the term human trafficking was coined.
That's right.
So I know we're going to go into some of the personal stories, but have you ever felt burnt out and overwhelmed, and can you share those experiences, and how did you overcome?
About 3 times in my career, I pretty much went into deep depression, where I was so overwhelmed with the stories that I was, the thing is, when you are around people who have violence, or around people who have been raped, or around people in human trafficking, their story is so terrible that you internalize a little bit every time you have that conversation. And so eventually, I would be moving along, and then I would get to a point where I was so burdened that I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I quit. I'm not going to ever do this. It's just ruining my life and so forth. It almost became an obsession. But then somebody called and said, well, there's this case. And then I started seeing the articles, and then I would get back into it. But with each time, I was a little bit stronger than I was before, because you develop defense mechanisms as part of that process. So I gained, went down, came, then down, and so forth. And there were 2 reasons why I went into this. One was the pain and suffering that I internalized. The other is there are 50 million people in modern slavery. Last year, globally, with everybody in the world working on this, we helped 133,000. That's 0.2%. I've spent 35 years working on this. We haven't even gotten up to 1%. Profits generated by this, $236 billion. The amount of money available is about $400 million. Now it's $200 million because of the US government cuts globally and so forth. You know, so when you see that there's a problem where there's 6.3 million women and girls in forced prostitution and nobody's really doing anything about it, when you've looked in the faces of these individuals and you've felt their pain, it really is sad and depressing. And so what I had to do is to adopt the starfish parable. Let me explain that is. So those of us who deal with this, it's a father and son walking down a beach. It's 10 kilometers long. And as the father's walking, he sees a starfish that's been beached. He picks it up, throws it in, sees another one, picks it up, throws it in, picks another one. The son looks at the dad and said, "Dad, this beach is 10 kilometers long. You can't possibly help all those starfish. What difference does it make?" Father looks to the son and says, "Well, to every starfish that makes it back into the water makes all the difference in the world." So we as activists have to take victories for any and all things that we do in order to basically feel like we're at least doing something. But again, 50 million people in modern slavery. Last year, 0.2%. It's pretty depressing.
Can you tell the story of how, when you were a younger U.S. diplomat, you tried to bring the issue of human trafficking to the State Department, and then there was a little bit of resistance initially? Do you want to share a little bit?
Okay, so human trafficking didn't have a name when I started doing this 35 years ago. It eventually got human trafficking. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that. But so as I got more involved in seeing this, I would go back to Washington, D.C. every year to do a debrief, and I would be telling everybody about this thing about human trafficking, women and girls forced into prostitution. It's a human rights violation. And they were like, well, it's not really a health issue. It's not, we don't really know it as a human rights issue or a governance issue. And it really got to a point where they were like, oh no, Matt Friedman's back in town, and he's going to be like telling us about that thing. And if I would walk into the cafeteria, it's like the parting of the waves, you know, because I became such a nuisance to them, because nobody really understood what I was talking about until 1999, when Madeleine Albright and Hillary Clinton decided that they were going to do something about human trafficking. And so in that year, I walked in and I said, I'm not going to say anything. And then I mentioned human trafficking. And all of a sudden, people say, you know about that? What do you know about that? And everyone's taking out their notebooks and they're writing things down. And all of a sudden, it was a completely different situation. But since then, you know, you've seen a lot of different trends and incarnations and changes and so forth. But there was a point at which it was going up in terms of the resources and the approaches. Then you had the financial crisis in Asia, then it went up again, and then you had the global financial crisis, and it's never recovered. And with COVID, the numbers have actually even gone down further in terms of the number of dollars available to address this and the number of people doing this. And with the scam situation, it's getting even worse.
You want to go into the scams then?
Well, most of you have heard, you know, about the fact there's about 220,000 young professional people from all across Asia that are tricked and deceived into going to scam centers in Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos. Many of them think that it's going to be a great job. They go there with great expectations. When they get there, they're taken to a place that's like a prison. And then they are forced to work 16 hours a day, every day. If they don't, they get tasered, beaten, tortured. And so here are kids that you would see at Hong Kong U or the international school or Chinese university or whatever that are regular people that we would know that are in these circumstances. A certain percentage of those people are tortured to death. They videotape it and then they sell the videotapes. The other part of the problem is the scams. $65 billion is scammed from people all over the world, you know, and the particular scam they use goes and takes everything from everybody. So, I mean, like, it's a long scam where you develop a relationship thinking you have a relationship with somebody, and then you get into trial and error with crypto, and then after that, there's a situation where they take everything. So those two crimes come together. We're working on this because it's affecting people here in Hong Kong, and it just shows that there are incarnations and changes in human trafficking.
Why don't you describe your reaction to a video of a victim of the pig butchering? And this is, there's a trigger warning. So if you really can't handle this.
I won't go there.
Yeah, you won't go there. Okay.
No. I will talk about
Yeah.
this, but I won't go deep into
Sure.
it.
Okay.
I'm just going to say that in order to understand the topic of what happens to these people and what's called harmcore, you have to watch a bunch of videos. And the thing about watching videos that I didn't understand is that once you've seen them, you can't unsee them. And so there was one particular video that I was so affected that for like an entire weekend, I just couldn't get out of bed. I mean, I was just so troubled by it. Yeah.
Catatonic.
And it's not as if I haven't experienced that. And I think it's kind of like police and ambulance drivers. They see a bunch of stuff and they get immune to it. But every once in a while, the door opens up. I was at a church event and I was on a panel and somebody asked the guy next to me a question and he started like crying. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, I'm just glad it's not me. And then she asked me and I started bawling because something about that particular event triggered me. And sometimes when I'm talking about this, I feel like I'm going to cry. And I don't mean to. It's just, you have to build up walls around yourself to protect you from the things that you have seen. And sometimes when you ignore them, you see them in your dreams. I have a lot of dreams that are sometimes pretty horrific. And that's, I guess, the way the mind works things out.
Now I'm starting to tear up because what you're talking about is trauma.
Yeah.
And because he's interacting or he's helping extremely traumatized people. And there is a cost and hence, you've burnt out. And so, what inspired you to write this book, Awakening the Advocate?
I wrote another book called Where Were You? And I'll probably tell that story later. But I was trying to make sense of my life. Okay, so many of us, if you stop and look at when you were in college, maybe you thought you were going to be doing this and this and this. You had a plan. And the plan didn't play out the way you thought it was going to play out. So I grew up in a small town in Connecticut. None of my brothers and sisters traveled. The idea that I left that community and traveled to 70 countries and did this work and so forth, I couldn't understand how that transition from a shy, introverted kid ended up here. And so during COVID, I did a lot of writing, articles and so forth, and I reflected out of my life and I tried to make sense. So the book that you have here has 3 parts to it. The first part is just testimonials and experiences that I had related to modern slavery. And then the second part looks at like my life, didn't really take into consideration human trafficking, but what are the things that you remember in your life that you piece together? And I had one mentor say to me, there's about 200 major events in your life that you will remember always. Ask me what I had for lunch 2 days ago. I can't tell you. Ask me what I did 2 days ago. I can't tell you. Most of us, it's the same way. We don't think of it. Our life is ordinary, but there's like the weddings and the births and the traumas and the experiences that you had with relationships that form us and create the individual who we are. And so I wanted to understand that. So the second part of the book is just, kind of relating series of stories. The whole book is 110 stories. Each one of them is like 1 page. So it's not a continuous read. And then the last part was to pull together the 2 other sections. What does it mean? From all of this that I've been doing over my life, what did I garner in terms of like the elevator pitch message? And what it really came down to is that with all of the issues and the problems that we face in this world, we're at about 5% achievement. Poverty, girls' education, bullying, drug trafficking, human trafficking. The reason for that is the expectation is that the NGOs and the governments and the United Nations are going to take care of all these problems. They don't have enough people, resources, ability to do that. So we as human beings have to identify and accept some responsibility. So for me, it's human trafficking. For you, it could be women's issues. My sister cares about animals. Causes are not selected by us. Causes pick us. So for me, it was not looking at 5 different things and choosing something. for whatever reason, I'm drawn to human trafficking because of something in my DNA. Something in my body says that injustice is something to have to fight. All of you have a cause. You may not know what it is. Find the cause, and then based on that, get involved. And so if each one of you did one thing associated with a particular cause, that would add up. If 1 million people did one thing, that's the only way we're really going to be able to heal the world and solve things. And so that this book that I wrote, which is another one, was the start of this to basically begin the process of helping people to address that emptiness or lack of purpose that they sometimes feel in their mind. You got a great job, your family's going well, but it's just kind of like, is there anything more? Should I be doing something? And the reason why you feel that way is there's an imbalance. You're taking. Society does that, but you're not giving back. When you get that balance in play, when you volunteer, when you get involved, your life changes. You feel good. I feel like I've never worked in my life because I love what I do. And I love it because it's consistent with who I am.
Can you share about your experience while you were working at the UN and working with China, and how that was, and how you were able to influence in quiet ways?
Well, I mean, when you work for the United Nations, the first thing that I learned when I worked with any institution is to go to the local people and say, what is it that works here? You know, the worst thing you can do is be that American coming in and working in these countries. I don't understand anything about those cultures. I don't understand the languages. And so I would put all my faith in my local people. And a lot of people from the agencies that I worked with didn't understand how awesome they are. And I'll tell one other story about that. But in China, what we did is I was told right from the beginning, don't ask the Chinese people if we can help you. They're proud. They don't need anyone to do that. So we would do an analysis, write it in English, translate it in Mandarin, then put it under the door. We didn't say where it came from. And so they started looking for these things because they recognized it. They eventually knew it was us, and they knew that we were trying to be helpful, but we didn't do something that would lose face. And how I learned this came back to an experience I had when I was in Nepal. When I was in Nepal, you know, I was a young, energetic, development worker, and my job was to get the government to do things. And for the first 2 years, I failed miserably. Couldn't get them to do anything. And I would come back to my staff, and I'd say to them, oh my gosh, I'm such a failure, I don't know what I'm doing, and so forth, and I don't know what can be done. I looked at the analysis, the data, everything else, and so that afternoon, after I had that kind of cathartic moment, one of my staff came up and said, do you want to have dumplings with me? Why don't we just meet after work? And when I got there, my entire staff was there. And they sat me down and they said, Matt, we like you. You know that you really want to help, but, let's face it, you're not from here. You don't know this culture. You need to trust us. We know what to do. So you want to go from A to B, we will go to A to Z, back to T, to J, to whatever. We'll do whatever it is. Trust us, and we'll get it done. So my feelings were hurt a little bit. I felt like, I failed, but I listened to them. And I then would go to them and I'd say, you guys are the leaders of this. You guys are the people that take it. Tell me what I need to do in order to make this happen. And then I was successful after that. So, I mean, I am a foreign person in a foreign country. I can manage the process of getting resources, but those resources really need to go to the local people. And those are the people who are really going to make the difference. And that's where it becomes sustainable. And, it lasts beyond the administration coming in.
Can you tell us about the shelter, the shelter experience in China? How they, over time, they opened the door for you to go on your own?
So the Chinese government approached me and said, we need some resources to modernize our shelters. We have 1,500 of them, and they are multi-service ones. They're for homeless people, for people who got robbed, don't have any money, people who are street people, whatever. Human trafficking was included in there, but they didn't know how to decipher who was in there. So I said, okay, well, I'll see if I can raise some money. And so I managed to get $500,000. And I went to them and I said, okay, well, this donor is going to give you the money to do this, but they said as a prerequisite, you have to go and see the shelters. Chinese government said, no, we can't have you do that. And so I said, well, I'm just a messenger, that's the prerequisite. So they finally agreed. So they would send me to a shelter. There would be 3 cars of minders there Chinese people from the government to see what I was doing. They would show me all kinds. Actually, the shelters were pretty good. They weren't bad at all. They just didn't know anything about human trafficking. So the first trip, they did that, and then they waited a couple of weeks to see if anything came up in the newspaper, and nothing did. So they allowed me to come back the second time. There were only 2 cars. Third time, there was only 1 car. The fourth time, there was Mr. Chin. And Mr. Chin would hang out with us, and we would have dinner and everything with him. But it was about them coming to terms with the fact that they recognized they needed to do something. They kind of knew what they needed to do, but they needed some help. But once they understood what the exercise was, and they got some local Chinese psychologists and sociologists and so forth to help, then they invested a lot of money and they really made it work.
Out of all the sex trafficking victims you've met and helped, was there a single person who stood out to you?
Well, I think that has to be Gita, and that's I tell this story quite often because it's a flagship story. Every once in a while in life you have a story and it changes you because you expect something and then something else happens. So the story behind Gita is I was in Nepal and I desperately wanted to do something to address human trafficking. So I decided I was going to write a book. As part of this book process, I went from shelter to interview the women and the girls. I got to one shelter and there was a girl named Gita. And every time I approached her, she said, no, I don't want to give my story. But she sat and listened to all my interviews. When I finished, she came running up and said, okay, you can have my story. So she sat on one side of the table, the rest of us on the other side of the table, and over a 3-hour period, she just told the worst story of rape and torture and disease and murder that I had ever heard. I was speechless. I didn't know what to say to her. I'd heard a lot of stories, but this was way off the chart. Finally, I turned to Gita and I said, wow, Gita, you must be so angry at the traffickers for the horrible things they did to you. She paused and paused. Then she said, no, I'm angry at you and you and you. She pointed at us. She said, where were you? Said that every single day she woke up praying for somebody to come help. Nobody came. Said she went to school till she was 12. She knew that everything was illegal right out in the open. Nobody was doing anything. She said she wasn't angry at the traffickers. She said they're just bad people doing what bad people do, bad things. She said she was angry at the good people, at society for allowing a 15-year-old girl to be commercially raped 7,000 times only to eventually get AIDS and she was dying. She called us all out. She basically understood that the 40,000 people like us that are working on this was insufficient to get above 1%. She recognized that the world needed to care, that there were 6.3 million women and girls in forced prostitution. And she was right. And so here it is, after 35 years. It's still 0.2%. You know, I may go into depression again because of that, simply because it's just so awful for me to say this. And at a time when the resources have gone from 400 million to 220 million because of these cuts, I can't stand it.
How about forced labor? Is there a victim of forced labor who you can't get out of your mind?
Well, I tell a story that there was a woman who I met who was tricked into going to a compound and working as a domestic worker. She thought she was going to be in a house, basically taking care of kids, and they were going to give her education and everything else. This is a typical scenario that people have. So once in the compound, in South Asia, what you have these compounds that have buildings that have high walls and barbed wire and so forth. She was locked in there. So for 2 years, she'd work from 6 in the morning till 11 o'clock at night, and she had no way out. And so there was no way of communicating with anyone. So one day she heard some kids outside on the outside of the wall. And so she saw a water bottle, and she did that note in the bottle thing, where she wrote something, and then she put it in the bottle and she tossed it over. The kids stopped talking. And so she waited. A day went by, 2 days went by, nothing. But then there was a knock on the door. And when the person who owned the building went out there, they were the police. And this woman was saying, oh, no, it's a misunderstanding. And then the woman ran up and said, I shouldn't be here and everything. And in this particular case, the police helped her out. So I really like that story because it had kind of a happy ending. And it was, you hear about people putting something in the bottle and throwing it in the ocean and stuff. In this particular case, it was kind of like that, but it had a happy ending.
Can you tell us about the children who were transporting hazardous materials from one container to another? Can you tell
Okay,
that story?
so we ran one case in Bangladesh, and the way this case worked was this trafficker went to a rickshaw walla who took kids to kindergarten, and he'd have like 6 in the back of the van, but he owed a lot of money and from gambling, and they said, basically, we're going to kill you if you don't get us 5 kids. And so he managed to bring 5 kids to a particular spot, but actually it was 6 kids. And so these kids were brought to this factory because they had this very toxic liquid in 50-gallon drums that had to be put from the big drums into small containers for printing companies. And if you put an adult in that situation, their brain would fry within 3 months. But if you put a 5-year-old, it would last for 6 months. And so eventually the kid's going to be retarded as a result of this process. But I met this guy in the prison in Bangladesh. And the story behind this is, if you really want to understand human trafficking, the real experts are not me. They're the victims and the perpetrators. So we would go into the prisons to get the perpetrators to talk to us. And so initially when you talk to them, they'd say, oh, I shouldn't be here. I'm a victim. I'm innocent. But they're all narcissists. So I would be standing in front of Ali, and I'd look over at Muhammad, and I'd say, he's the best criminal I ever met. Never met a smarter criminal than that. All of a sudden, Ali would sit up like this, and he'd forget about the fact that he's innocent and say, oh, well, I did this and this and this and this and this. And he was the one who told me that story, but he told it from the standpoint, ha, 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 I got 5 kids, and then there was that 6th kid. I wonder what that parent felt like. And, when I hear about victims of human trafficking, there's compassion and empathy. When I hear what these traffickers say, I get shivers down my spine. I'm a parent, and I just think about how they didn't care anything about those kids. They didn't care about those parents, the family, or any of those things associated with it.
Sorry, keep going.
Okay, I don't know. I just want to make
We
sure
have a little bit of time.
Yeah, we should talk a little bit about the things in.
Do you want to wrap up?
No, the other part of the book.
Yeah, are you finished?
No.
Okay, do you want to wrap up?
No, yeah, that one's done.
Oh, okay, that one's
Yeah,
done.
that one's
Okay.
done. Yeah.
Can you share about your, you've had cancer. You overcame cancer
Yeah.
over 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Please tell us about that experience and how it changed your life.
Well, how it changed your life, too. I mean, actually, it's harder on the person who doesn't have cancer. I came to terms with the fact that I might die. And because I had to have an operation and we have a predisposition for blood clots, I went into the operation thinking I wouldn't wake up. And I did. And so, actually, in some ways, cancer was one of the better things that happened in my life. It changed me in a way that helped me to understand that I'm not mortal and that I'm going to die. A lot of people feel like they're going to live forever, and they don't really stop and think about the fact that they have hopes and dreams and aspirations that they will get to, but, well, we'll get to it next year or the next year. That wake-up call when I woke up was, oh, there's a lot of things I want to do. And so every day I wake up thinking, wow, this is great. I got another day, and what can I do, and how can I achieve it, and so forth. And a lot of people who say that. I changed my diet and changed my habits, and, I feel a lot better about myself as well.
Yeah. In the second half of your book, you go into childhood experiences.
I'll give 3 of them.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll just do it really quickly. So, I mean, there are just certain experiences in life. And then we're going to open it up for question and answers. What my earliest memory is being on a beach and feeling like I was abandoned. I have 5 brothers and sisters and parents. And when you go on a beach trip and you have all these siblings and stuff, sometimes one of the siblings walks off and you don't realize until you get to the car. So my 5 siblings and my parents managed to get to the car, and I'm on the beach feeling like, ooh, my parents left me, and so forth. To me, it felt like it was an hour, and eventually they found this little 5-year-old crying, and, where's my parents? And the lifeguard came, and everybody came, and so forth. And eventually my mom came and said, hey, Matt, come on, let's go home, and stuff. But that was an abandonment moment for me. I really felt like at that moment I was by myself. And even though it was only a 15-minute difference from when it happened to something else, it had a devastating impact on me. And I didn't realize it until much later in my life when I was trying to figure out myself and make sense of myself and make myself better and all those things that we try to do as we go through life. A second story that I talk about is when I was in the 9th grade, I was a pretty good student. I was pretty serious about school. I got really bad after that. But I went to a tag sale, and there was a briefcase. And so back then, they didn't have, they have knapsacks. You know, people kind of just carried their books. And I said, okay, this is a way of carrying my books. I'll have my briefcase. So I decided that that was going to be my thing. And so I went into high school, and I would carry this briefcase. And I was the only kid who had a briefcase. And all of a sudden, people were like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? You think you're a little businessman? And so the more they put pressure on me to like change, the more I said, oh, I'm not going to change. I'm going to do this. But then my friends started to abandon me. He's become the weird kid with the briefcase. And so eventually I did what everybody does in high school is I caved in. And I often wondered what would have happened in my life if I had been the kid who kept the briefcase forever and overcame it. Because one of the biggest lessons in my life is I care so much that I don't care at all. And what that means is I don't care what people think about me. I don't care if they like me or dislike me, and I try to be a good person, and sometimes people don't like what I do. It used to bother me. I don't feel that way anymore. And if I had gotten over that early in life, I think I would have been further along in my life. The third one is a car accident. When I was in college, I was in my third year of a PhD at NYU. In psychology. I was going to be a psychologist, and I was going to have a great practice and make a lot of money and live the good life and all of that. But in order to put myself through school, I was working for the American Health Foundation, and I was crossing the Brooklyn Bridge in a taxi, and I got into a bad car accident. The taxi driver drove into somebody, the car went on fire, he ran away, I'm unconscious in the back seat, my face is all messed up, and so I had to drop out of school. And so at that time, you know, I put my life on hold, and I had a friend who worked for the United Nations. She said, can you write a paper about Zambia? You know, and I didn't know anything about Zambia, and it was on public health. I didn't know anything about public health, and so I wrote it, and then she said, okay, well, I'd like to send you to Zambia to be part of this team. I said, I come from Connecticut. To go from Connecticut to Massachusetts requires 6 weeks of planning. You know, we don't travel anywhere. Finally got me the passport, got me on a plane, sent me to Kenya and Zambia and Geneva, and the fact that I was paid to work on something to help people and seeing the world, I was hooked. Never went back, never finished it. I regret that a little bit because I always wanted that doctorate, but in any case, here I am. So I don't know what time it is.
Okay,
so,
we
have to.
Do you want to hear one more question from Matt? Yeah, is that okay? Okay. So why don't you share about the Hollywood movie? Yeah, you're working on a Hollywood movie. You co-wrote a script, and now Sean McNamara, the director of Reagan, he's attached. Do you want to share about that?
Okay, so some people learn through experiences like this. Some people learn through, you know, a presentation where you have slides. A lot of people learn through drama. Okay, and especially in this part of the world. Much of my career, I would use soap operas within countries to get points across. So because of my frustration that we haven't been able to get more and more people understanding human trafficking, I decided that I would write a screenplay. So I wrote an initial novel, and then I shared it with somebody. They said, that's the wrong book. We like the fact that you're going to do this. We'll put you in touch with another author, and we wrote the screenplay. It was an interesting experience. I hope it gets made someday. You know how it is, where people say they want to do things, but it doesn't always happen. But yeah, if it does, I'll let you know.
Yes. Excellent. Okay, let's open up Q&A. I think the staff will pass around mics. Yes, Chris, go ahead. Do you want?
I want to start with a question. I want to tell another story because I know it and I think it's important.
Oh,
Sorry. You okay?
And now the end is near. Sorry. I put a mic in my hand, I always get carried away. I want to prompt another story because I think it's important to hear, because when you're talking about this subject, I always wonder, I can never help wondering, what can be done and what are you up against? You told a story once about meeting someone who was a slavery activist. And he met you because he just wanted to meet you. And that sent a shiver.
Don't tell the story, though.
No. It sent a shiver down my spine.
Get it up because, okay.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay.
Great question.
One of the questions. That was what we were going to say that, but we were jumping around.
Excellent.
So
Thank you.
I was working for the United Nations. I was in Hanoi. It was over a holiday period. I was by myself, and this guy calls me up and says, "You Mr. Friedman who worked for the United Nations on human trafficking?" I said, "Yes." That happens when you're a United Nations person. Can I meet you? I want to learn about human trafficking. So I said, okay. So I met this guy over in Hanoi next to the lake at a nice restaurant. He was very charismatic, and he was very charming and very intelligent and everything else. And so for an hour, I talked about, my experiences working in human trafficking. Finally, I turned to him and I said, what's your story? He said, well, I'm a human trafficker. I said, excuse me? Yeah, I'm a trafficker. I do all those things that you said. The girls and, I beat people and I got to do what I need to do and so forth. Thank you very much for giving me your perspective. I really appreciate that. I learned a lot today. And so I had two choices. I could either sit there and listen to him more or get up and get really huffy, and I decided to stay there. And for 90 minutes, he continued going on. He told me about all the things that he did, how he did it. He eventually gave me his business card, said, go ahead, see if you want to catch me. You'll never get me. We tried. We couldn't. And one of the things he said over and over again is that you guys are so ridiculous. You NGO guys are you're so ridiculous. You have to follow rules and regulations. You have to do your progress reports. You spend 40% of your time trying to raise money to do these types of things. You're always out there working and striving and so forth. We don't have to do anything. You get close to us, we mutate, we change, we break a law, we break somebody's face, we do whatever it is that we need to do. And that was a very telling moment to have had that experience, because he was right. It's an unfair advantage. There's 500,000 criminals out there. Last year, only about 6,000 of them were convicted. That's 0.8%. 500,000, and there's about 40,000 of us. And we have to follow all those rules and regulations. So, yeah.
Is that the story?
It is, but then I want to follow up with a question, because it relates to that. And it's a big question, because you always talk about the tip of the iceberg and the fact, who could be doing more in the world about this and isn't?
Well, it should be governments. A lot of governments don't like this topic. It's confusing. When I worked for the United Nations, I will say, put my hand on my chest when I say this, I believe in the United Nations system, but I spent a lot of time in five-star hotels eating really good food, debating and discussing the issue of exploitation. We weren't close enough to the action. There are two groups that can do a lot. One is the private sector, and that's why the organization that I run, the Mekong Club, works with the private sector. Because the private sector, if your bank, $236 billion generated, any money gets into that bank that's illegal, they get fined and penalized. They don't want that to happen. If you're a manufacturer, you have a supply chain, somewhere in your supply chain, there could be a sweatshop, investigative journalist finds out about it, that can be a reputational risk for you. If you're in the hotel industry, you basically have, sex trafficking, construction, supply chains, et cetera, et cetera. The private sector, despite what people feel and think, wants to address these issues, not only to protect their business, but because they recognize it's the right thing to do. And there's a sense of urgency associated with it. I feel that the private sector does more to address human trafficking than the NGOs do, because they have to, and because they want to, and because they're closer to the action. The other group is I'm trying to get in front of influencers. This whole issue of human trafficking into scam centers, we have these videos in multiple languages to sensitize people. So we're trying to get in front of influencers in Bangladesh and India and all over, because those people have influence. They have following of 1 million people. You get one of those people to show one of these videos and to endorse it, it makes a difference. The point I'm making is the world has changed. It used to be that we would use traditional, advertising and media and so forth. Now we have to change the way we approach things. Chris has been a great help to us. He's an expert in marketing and advertising, and he's been a mentor to me, and we've worked on a bunch of projects, and I'm really thrilled to have him here. Yeah. We have a couple of things that we're working on that I think we're pretty excited about, and I so appreciate you, Chris. Yeah, Chris, thank you so much for all that you do. You have such a good heart.
Yeah, absolutely. Get to know him if you're looking for advertising and whatnot. Yes, go ahead, Aaron.
I have two questions. First one is a bit shallow. Have you ever punched somebody? That's my first question. And how do you think, my second question is, how do you think AI is going to change modern slavery?
I've wanted to punch a lot of people. I've never been in a fight before. And it's partly because I just have this thing when I was a kid, I could just give them that evil stare and I would stand up and I would puff up, and I would look so intimidating that they never did anything. And inside, I'm like, "Ooh, they're going to get hit," and so forth. I'm like a boa constrictor. I just don't have it in me to be that aggressive. Yeah, you know that.
He's not. He is a big teddy bear. That's a secret.
AI, scam centers are using AI. Okay, so I just want to lay into one aspect of these scam centers, and I want you to listen to this very carefully, is that criminals now have access to so much money that syndicates that used to compete with each other are now working together. I had one of these people tell me that, have you ever seen those old James Bond movies where you had the Spectre, which is the evil group that had all this money and they had missiles and everything? He said, that's what the world's moving to. These syndicates are combining together, using AI, using technology, coming up with lots of money, using technology to launder the money, and now they're trying to figure out what to do with it. And so you can imagine that they feel like they are all of a sudden having power. So actually, the Economist said that $500 billion was scammed out of people last year. And AI and technology is very much a part of that process. We're trying to apply AI in a positive way. We make videos with AI now in order to prevent things and so forth. And we are working with organizations that will look at big data to identify trends and so forth. But we're way behind the criminals when it comes to this. And that's a scary thing.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Carmel.
Another champion.
I wasn't on my phone. I was writing a whole list of questions, so I won't ask them all because there's too many. But and one actually is probably for you, Matt, and one maybe for you, Sylvia. So, Matt, I think the question, and I always find you inspiring, and thank you so much for all the work that you've done in this topic. It's incredible. So I always feel somewhat lacking as an individual. And you spoke about, if 1 million of us all did something individually, we could make a real difference in this area of human trafficking and slavery. And it reminded me of a time in Hong Kong when I think I could have done more. So I wondered, for you personally, could you share some advice to an individual about how do you take action? What can you do in the moment? And the other question, and maybe it's Sylvia or maybe it's you, but you've dedicated your life to be a slavery activist. You talked a little bit about the impact it's had on you and having deep depression on occasions, but I wonder what it's actually had the impact of your commitment has had on your family life.
Okay, so usually when I finish a talk, if I do a presentation, I do a lot of talks, I say if I could get each of you to do one thing related to human trafficking, that would be 1 times 40. And then I say, well, what can you do? One thing you can do is to sit in a talk like this and learn about it. Guess what? You've done your one thing. You're already done. But if you go out and tell another person, you've done another thing. If you see an article and you post it on social media, you've done another thing. If you have a conversation. So awareness is a big part of the problem that needs to be done. If you are going to buy a branded item, go online to see if they have a policy. If they do, congratulate them. If they don't, say, listen, I like your products, and I'd feel better if you had a policy in a very polite way. You don't have to be aggressive. Companies react to that type of thing. You can volunteer. There's all kinds of volunteer opportunities. I have about 120 volunteers of people from all walks of life. In fact, my youngest volunteer was 9 years old. She saw me in a documentary. She contacted me and said, Mr. Friedman, human trafficking is terrible. I want to help. I said, you're 9 years old? She said, so what? I said, you're 9 years old. She said, 9-year-olds are the new 16-year-olds. Give me a chance. So I said, what can you do? She said, I can find anything on the internet. So I had a couple of second-year, Ivy League law students. I gave them something to get it online. They couldn't find it. Gave it to her. 2 days later, had everything. Because that was her God-given gift. Each one of us has something that's special about it. It could be public speaking or writing or managing or, networking or, communicating or selling T-shirts. It doesn't matter. You apply that to volunteerism. It makes a big difference. Donate. There's a lot of organizations that need help. And those organizations, our organization lost 40% of our fundings because of the U.S. government laws. There's other organizations, there may be some in this room as well. give up a meal or two, identify that organization, give them a check. That little bit helps. So I say this not only for human trafficking, but for all of those other issues. Figure out what your cause is, and then own it and be a part of it. And if 1 million people, as you said, did that, it would make a difference. Well, I can't do anything without this one here. I mean, I was. I'll tell the story. Well, one story. So I started coming to Hong Kong, and Sylvia eventually found me because she was working for a TV station and wanted to interview me, and eventually we became friends, and we started hanging out and everything. And I was at the time living in Bangkok, and I was flying back and forth. And so I was going back to Bangkok, and she calls me on the phone, and she says to me, "You're the worst boyfriend I ever had. You don't buy me flowers, you don't be..." I didn't even know we were dating. I had gotten to a point in my life where I said, nobody's going to want me. I was so down on myself. And, you know, I was going to dedicate my life to this. And then we eventually got married and so forth. But, you know, the thing about human beings is sometimes two people come together and they stay at this level. Sometimes they come together and they're good people, but they bring each other down. When Sylvia comes in my life, I'm like this. So I'm a much better version of myself because that was what I was missing in my life, is to have somebody who I cherished, and she cherished me, and we understood each other. In her story, she's the public speaker. You should be listening to about her. She's the better writer than I am. And, you know, I hope that she can come back here. Her books are amazing. And they are in her. Tell them about Fearless. Just tell them.
No, it's okay. But Matt is the real deal. He has single-handedly catalyzed a movement in the corporate world against modern slavery, and he really is relentless in his commitment. He helps everyone. You know, he doesn't hold back. And so sometimes, to answer your question about the family life, sometimes that means I don't see him because both of us are so busy. But we do take every Saturday off, and that is just our rest day. And we don't do any work. We try not to schedule anything. And I think that's been a lifeline, and that's prevented us from burning out, like completely, since I think 2013.
Yeah.
So we haven't really burnt out. I mean, there have been down or low valleys, but it's been okay. And his 2 adult sons are in the U.S. and they talk with their dad every week. So by the grace of God or Allah or whoever, higher power, they're thriving. Emergency room doctor, the oldest one, and veterinarian, the younger one. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, Daniel.
Thanks for this inspiring and wonderful story. You know, this is really David and Goliath, but, you know, much bigger. But the numbers are so depressing. Your statistics are so depressing. And you know, it all comes down to money, basically. You need the finances to battle against, you just explained how much money these pools of criminals have. So the question is, you know, how to find that. Obviously governments are, you know, forget it. You know, they have other priorities now because of everything that's happening in the world. So it's the billionaires, and we have enough of them. You know, the super rich. You know, Bill and Melinda Gates, they're focused on diseases. But there must be someone out there, whether it's an Asian or a Middle Eastern or an American. I don't think Elon Musk is going to take this, but, you know, you need someone like that to champion the cause. Have you thought about that? That's my first question.
Sylvia knows lots and lots of billionaires. For whatever reason, she's in her network, and she's done private equity work and so forth. And we've had a lot of conversations with ultra-rich people. I tend not to get money from them for whatever reason, and I think it's partly because so many people are asking them for money. To be fair, that, you know, how do you decipher who gets and who doesn't get? And I think if you've amassed a huge amount of money and everyone's coming after it and you have to maintain that money and so forth, you get distracted and you're just focusing on those kind of things. I almost prefer the smaller amounts of money. And it's because, each of us can contribute a certain, $50 US or $100 or whatever it is that you can do, because then you become a part of the process of helping to address these types of things. I've had to raise lots of money over the years for the US government, for the United Nations. It's the least desirable thing for me.
Yeah.
And it's where I have most of my stress. And, even last couple of weeks, it's just been really hard, just because I want to get on with the work. I just want to do these types of things. But if you're an NGO, and anyone who's in this room who's an NGO person knows this, that's a very important part of what it is that you have to do in order to survive. And I wish there was a big fund. There should be $3 billion a year spent on this globally. And the U.S. government spends $27 billion on AIDS, and they spend $31 billion on the fight against drugs, but only $200 million on this topic. And again, I come back to, you heard that story about that 11-year-old girl, times 6.3 million. And each of these people basically are forced to have sex with anywhere from 2, 4, 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 people against their will. That's commercial rape. So we have all these kind of raping scenarios that out there from these people who want to be in this situation. How can the world allow for this to happen? That's the fundamental thing that I just don't understand.
Oh, thank you. I think that's a coffee meeting. No?
Now, I had another important, because in the beginning you talked about, everyone needs to find their moral whatever
Cause, yeah.
Yeah, cause. Have you read the book by my countryman Rutger Bregman, The Moral Ambition?
No, I've heard.
Okay, he's now starting this thing called School for Moral Ambition.
Yeah.
But basically, he's telling everybody in the Netherlands to begin with that works for banks and private equity and all. He said, "You're wasting your talent. Get out of here and find your cause." It's causing quite a stir.
Yeah.
Well, you should read the book. It's quite.
I
fun.
will.
Thank you, Daniel. And you have received money from billionaires, by the way. Okay, there is
Not a lot.
Pauline, I think. Is it Pauline? Or no. Or who? Okay, yeah.
Thanks very much. It was just a really insightful talk, and I haven't really been involved. But I guess, awareness is a really important thing, and money obviously is a really important thing. But the real need is kind of action, maybe people to go in there and actually do something physically or whatever it is. And maybe that's also missing, and could it be because people are scared, or because, there is violence involved, or with technology, people's details can become known. So what would your comments be about that? And, how can we help in a kind of physical way?
Yeah, I mean, if you're just raising awareness, if you're sharing articles, if you're setting up meetings to allow people like me to come in, if you're, being a responsible consumer or volunteering, there's very little risk associated with that. I've been in situations, we both been in situations where we could have lost our life. And when I was in Nepal, two of the colleagues were killed because they were going there after this. People say, well, why would you do this? But, I mean, the police and fire people do the same thing. It goes with the job. You just have to try to be careful. I left Nepal because I was getting calls by people who were saying they were going to throw acid on you and your family. And so, that was a point where I felt like I needed to make a change. And similar things happened in Bangladesh and in other parts. But for the average person working on this, there's very little risk associated with it.
Yeah,
Oh,
I guess I'm kind of saying that if we don't mind to take the risk, if we wanted to take the risk, or if people wanted to take the risk, how can we actually help?
Well,
Or is that something that would actually be more harder for you to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people want to kind of get into the heart of volunteering and really do the good work, but the problem is you're dealing with people who are super traumatized. So unless you're trained to deal with that, it's hard to have contact with victims. And even the, going out into the field and I mean, tell your story. No, just...
No, there's too many people who have questions. Okay, no.
Okay, she's not going to say it. I tried. Oh, here we go.
It's very inspiring how you've been like in this field for many years, and like I really appreciate you talking about like finding your gift. But I'm sure many people have like trouble finding theirs since they might not have found what they like to do yet. And like as a 16-year-old, I would like to know how I can start to take action to find what I'm like appreciated for or what my gift is.
Well, let me just say you're way ahead of the game. The fact that you're here today and you're asking that question, because you already recognize that there's something that needs to be done. In my life, what I've come to realize is that as I'm experienced the news or social media or articles or LinkedIn or whatever, sometimes I'm drawn to something more than something else. And so then I make a mental note, okay, well, why am I interested in this? And then so I'll go deeper into that and deeper and deeper and deeper. And then I come to realize there's something about that topic that resonates with me. And then I'm kind of drawn into that. And so I recommend if you don't know what your cause is, find out what it is. My sister doesn't care about human beings. She loves animals. She has an animal orphanage. She has 50 dogs, 50 cats, a couple of horses and so forth, animals that have been abused. That's her thing. My brother doesn't care about humans or animals. He cares about the environment. So they all kind of figured out through their journey in life that, you know, they cared about a certain thing. Open your mind, open your heart, and move away from kind of data that doesn't really add value to your life, and just go on and look at topics. There's videos on everything, there's articles on everything, and figure out what makes your heart sing. And then when you get that, you're getting much closer to what it is that you're doing.
Thank you.
Hi. So I actually am. I also have two questions. Like the first one is, you know, I don't expect a quick. I mean, I think it can't be answered with a short answer. But I'm still very curious because this thing about the scamming thing that we've been reading about already for years, and so we all know it exists. Everyone, you know, some people have been rescued. Then why is it so deep seated that, like, you know, they haven't. You know, it hasn't been really resolved, in that, you know, is it ever going to be resolved, or are they just getting stronger and nothing can be done? Like, what can be done, do you think, or what is the current situation regarding this whole scamming syndicate? And my second question is a bit smaller, as in, how, because I think it's not like people don't want to help, but sometimes they don't know how. Like, if sometimes people living in our world are not aware of, if they see a situation where there's human traffic going on, we're maybe not aware of that it's happening and what we can do in those situations. I'm just wondering if there are tips on like how to spot these situations and what we can do at the moment to help. Thanks.
Okay, so there were 39 scam centers that we know exist in those three countries. We have satellite shots of them. KK Park, which is the biggest one, is right across the border from Thailand. The amount of money generated from these scam centers is enough to get people not to do anything about it. Now, Thailand is suffering now because a certain number of people enter Thailand and end up in these scam centers, crossing over borders and so forth, and it's having an impact on tourism. There's a lot of Chinese people who will not go to Thailand now because of this, and that's having an effect. But in Cambodia, Myanmar, and Laos, where these locations are, everybody's getting rich. You know, I was in Cambodia, and I've never seen more Mercedes and Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and because these scammers, a lot of them are on lists, they can't leave, so they're stuck there, so they're just spending the money locally. So for a while, they were actually taking the phone calls from Hong Kong and Taiwan and mainland China and so forth, but they stopped doing that. And the other part of it is that if you help 1,000 people out of this center, out of the 300,000 that are in there, you got to deal with all of them. So there was a big raid that happened in one of these places, and they have 1,000 people, and it's been 8 months, and they still haven't gotten everybody home. And so if you then want to take on all of these centers, what are you going to do with it? So, I mean, we're among a group of people that are thinking about developing the what's called a command center. So in anti-terrorism, you have a command center that is a bunch of computers and people and analysts, and, you know, they can go into the dark web and they understand everything. Those people go after terrorism. If we did the same thing for these scam centers, you could figure out the URLs and the locations and so forth, and it's 8,000 miles away, you can stop these things. You just have to have individuals and organizations that can get around the privacy and everything else laws and have the same mandate as the terrorism to allow for that type of thing to happen. What was the second question? I forgot. Oh, so Sylvia and I did this presentation tour across the United States, 76 consecutive days. Went down from Vancouver to the bottom part of California, to Texas, to Chicago, down to, and during that time we had a lot of, often mothers come up to us and say, I was at that mall and I saw this thing happening, or I was at that bus stop, or and I didn't know what to do. And so I didn't do anything, and years later, you know, and by being at this thing, you triggered the fact that I had this memory. It didn't go away. So it's a good question. There's lots of inventories online. You just search indicators of human trafficking, and they'll have lists of these things. So, I mean, I do training on these types of things on a regular basis, but if you're not part of those trainings, you just go online. Everything you need is there. There's an organization called Polaris in the United States that has a whole section on that, and you go on there and you'll get what it is. Because in Thailand, I would say to students that I would present to, if you see something, tell. And so 21 times they would report it to their teacher and then to us, and every single time it was a case, we were able to address it. It was batting 1,000, you know, because they immediately, even as young people, saw that something was wrong, went to their parents, reported it, we looked into it, and we resolved that situation. I think you need to send the I'll send it to the Asian Society. We have these videos in multiple languages, and as I said, we're trying to get in front of influencers.
Anyone else?
So I just want to ask about your experience working with governments, especially in countries that with problems of corruption. Because in Vietnam, I was there like some years ago working with IOM. Same struggle with me. I attended lots of like conferences, and they arranged for government officials to touristic areas like Halong Bay instead of really getting into the business, and a lot of money spent in areas like just getting the officials. And I was told by workers inside IOM that if we don't spend the money, if we don't organize such a fancy trip for these officials, they're not going to come and listen to what we are talking about in the conference. So do you have the same struggle in how actually can we make things better, like not wasting money in corrupting the officials in that way?
So during the time that I worked for the United Nations, I came to a conclusion that within every administration you have really good people, not so good people, and a lot of people in between. And so when I was in Nepal, we tried to fix corruption, and we came to realize it didn't work. So what we did in Nepal was we identified prosecutors and judges and police that really cared about the local people. We didn't worry about the corrupt ones, we just focused on them. And so what would happen is, in order for a case to move forward of sex trafficking, the sex trafficking victim had to go to the district office and report it there. The person would be picked up, and then there would be a bribe and they'd get out immediately. So we worked out an arrangement whereby an NGO person would go to the district office with them. They would report the case, and then 5 minutes later, they'd make a call to Kathmandu to one of these prosecutors who cared about this, and he'd call down and say, I want this case to be sent up to us immediately. And then it would be put into a system and fast-tracked, and so we went from 2 cases to... My experiences with Vietnam and China and Laos and Cambodia and all of that was very much similar. You find those people within the system who, for whatever reason, care about this, and you try to take them away from the conferences and the panels and the discussions and sit them down and help them to understand that that's not where you're going to have your breakthroughs. Your breakthroughs are going to be when we get you into the field so you actually see what's happening. Because even the most hardened person, when they see exploitation right in front of them, many people feel like they have to act, especially if they have a predisposition to doing that. So that's always been the approach that I've used, and it has worked quite well. So, I mean, the generic sense of, like, I've worked in Nigeria, and they say you can't do anything in Nigeria. Well, we did things in Nigeria. We found some people who were really compassionate and empathetic and caring, and, You can find that all over the place, but you have to change the way you approach things. You don't, and it's also the same with when I'm working with corporations. I don't go necessarily to the corporate social responsibility and compliance person. I have an event like this with 100 people from different businesses, and then I do this, and 10 people are going to come up to me and say, I don't know what it is about this issue, but it really affects me, and I want to help. What can I do? And there's people in here that have that same feeling. And those are the people who become my ambassadors. So they may not be the right person to work with in that company, but they infect the others with a sense of good and responsibility. And that's really how we do it. We do the same with schools. You go and you teach the kids. The parents come back and say, what did you do with my kid? They keep talking about this issue. Faith-based groups, whatever. Whatever we can do to get in front of people who care about this, we're trying to mine those individuals and then empower them and give them what they need to in order to address the issue. How are we on time? 10 minutes. One more? Okay. Okay.
Hi, thank you very much for the insightful talk. It was really, really interesting and inspiring. I wanted to ask you, Matt, you mentioned a statistic that there's like 6+ million women and girls in
6.3.
6.3. So that's a huge number, but that means that there's a demand for this. So I wanted to ask about the Johns who actually go to these places. Is there any way to choke the demand?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so to address that in Nepal, we decided we were going to do a full-length film. So it was called Chameli. It was 2.5 hours long. And it showed like a woman being trafficked, and then she ended up in the brothel and all the things that happened there, and then how she got back, and she had AIDS and all the things happened to her. In fact, it was shot in a Catholic school that was made into a brothel for that scene because they didn't have a budget to go off and do it in a real brothel and so forth. And there were a lot of stories associated with that. But that particular film ran for 78 days in Kathmandu in 3 cinemas. It was the most watched video. And what we heard from a certain number of men is they said, oh my gosh, I had no idea that these women, you know, didn't think that I was super handsome and, you know, went into lust and have sex with me and so forth. You know, you mean they're exploited? Wow, you really kind of ruined it for me. So a certain percentage of people have that kind of impact. Now, there may be others that get off on that or they get excited about that, but you try to figure out this group of people who are contributing to it and then exposing it in any way you can with films or talks or, you know, whatever it is, and then you kind of chip away at that because you're right, that's part of the problem, is if there was no demand, there would be no sex trafficking.
There's actually a group in Bangkok. Oh, what are they called? MST, I think, and they target the Johns and try to reach out.
Ex-Johns will target the Johns,
yeah. Ex-Johns will reach out to them and try to meet the void, the emptiness in their lives, because that's often what's motivating them to fill it with sex. So yeah, thank you, Valerie. And I believe we're going to have final remarks, I think by Holly. Or can we do a selfie? Because Matt's always wanted to do that, and we've never had a chance to do that before. Yes, is that okay if you all kind of squeeze in? And here, I'm going to have to. Does anyone have a really long arm? Joshua, where are you? Come here. I've got the longest arm I know.
Time I see Joshua, he gains another.
It's my talent. Yeah. It is your talent. Okay, but can you get everyone in? Yeah, and especially Matt.
No.
Okay, is everyone in?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Please stay in touch.
We're so thankful that you came here and provided these such a powerful and inspiring story of your life. So thank you again. And come back anytime and share more stories. We'd love to have both of you come back. And we have one book, I think, still available for sale, maybe. And Matt has agreed to sign books, right?
I'm just putting my signature on.
Yeah.
Holly, I don't know if this is kosher or not, but we have some books that we brought, but it's not through your library, but we can give a cut. Anyways, we'll work it out.
Okay, we'll work it out. But yes, yeah, if you have more books and people want to buy them, please, yeah, go ahead. And thank you all for coming. I appreciate it and hope to see you again. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.